All right, so here what I want to do is I want to explore a common thing that happens when people are interacting with each other, which is the experience of getting annoyed or aggravated by conduct of someone else. This can be the case when someone acts toward us a certain way. It can even be the case, though, when someone acts that way in our presence, even if it's not directed toward us. We get frustrated, aggravated, offended, insulted. We developed feelings of animosity, contempt toward people. In extreme examples, people even get violent or kill each other over essentially how someone is acting. And so what I want to do is try to lay out what I think is going on when that's happening. Why do we respond with negativity and anger and frustration and sometimes even malice and violence? And then I want to show why I think it's actually a blessing in disguise, why it's no accident that this happens, why we oftentimes have these same patterns of aggravation recur in our lives. And I want to kind of tap into kind of the divine creative level to kind of show what I think is happening behind the scenes, and then hopefully provide some kind of practical tips and guidance of how we can basically conduct ourselves in those situations going forward in a way that prevents us from staying on this merry-go-round, and hopefully helps us do some healing and maturing and growing to kind of break that cycle. So what I'll do is I'll draw our two people, call it me and you, person one, person two, A and B. And what we'll do is we'll imagine that person one is doing an activity that is causing aggravation in person two. Right? And so you can just take a moment for yourself to think about what, if you're person two, what person one could be doing, right? Common things like, people get annoyed when other people chew too loudly around them. I know when I'm on public transportation and someone's like playing music on their phone or talking loudly, especially if I'm trying to pay attention to something, I get like really worked up about that, really frustrated. I know when I'm in conversation, if someone's interrupting, especially repeatedly, kind of jumping in and unsolicitedly kind of forcing their way into the conversation, overasserting themselves, that gets under my skin a lot. I get aggravated. I think I mentioned in another video before when I'm in conversation and somebody is like talking about a topic, a political topic, say, or a scientific topic or something, and I notice they're being kind of careless with their facts. They're getting a little fast and loose, sometimes saying things that are incorrect or things like that I get really aggravated about that. And I think one of the things we want to start noticing and paying attention to is, when do we notice ourselves getting aggravated in a way that's like clearly disproportionate to the situation, right? So going back to the example I gave on public transportation, someone's playing their music, a little bit of annoyance here and there about that, I think makes a lot of sense. Hey, you're trying to focus, this other person's being inconsiderate. But to get, really worked up about it, to get really upset to the point where you can't focus at all, where maybe you're starting to shake or clench your jaw, right? This is how I tend to respond in these situations. That's an indicator that there's something else going on there, right? It's not simply just that you're being distracted. It's getting into something in the core of me that's creating or alerting me to an existing disturbance. And so in this video, what I'm going to try to do is to lay out what I see as that dynamic. So let's say, we'll use that example, that we're sitting here and we're on this bus together. Right, and this person's in their seat, I'm in my seat, and they've got their phone, right, and they're playing their music really loud, or they're having a conversation into their phone, their speakerphone really loud, talking to someone. And here I am in my little world, I've got my headphones on, trying to pay attention, right, but I'm getting aggravated, I'm getting really pissed off about this, right? How could you, how dare you, how awful, all those things. What I think is really happening here is essentially it's alerting me to my pattern of repression. It's alerting me to essentially a division I've created within myself. And what it's doing is it's creating an opportunity to heal that. It's also, though, creating an opportunity for me to essentially reinforce the pattern, in which case I won't grow, I won't heal, I won't change. And then a day later, a week later, a year later, 20 years later, when this situation happens again, I'm going to be doing this negative reactivity again because the issue in me hasn't really been resolved. So let me try to kind of zoom in. What I'm going to do is zoom in on this dynamic here and kind of flesh out what I mean. All right, so person one, person two, and I'm going to kind of open the body up a little bit because I'm going to try to show inside how I see things operating. All right, so person two is providing the stimulus, and person one, right, who's me in this situation, is the one who's having the negative reactivity. And so again, the example I'm giving is person two is doing something in a public place, public transportation, talking loudly on a phone, playing their music in a way that everyone else can hear, and I'm getting all aggravated, all worked up about it. What I believe is happening here is there's some kind of coil or tightness inside of me, right? Something that this person obviously did not put there. This is a person I've never met, maybe we'll never meet again. But their behavior is causing in me something that was already there, some tightness, some pre-sensitivity to kind of start to vibrate or activate, right? And what I think is happening here is essentially at some point in my development, right? Could have been in my childhood, could have been in my adulthood, right? We've got our yin yang here, right? This is the darkness on this side, this is the light over here. In the light is where we put all those qualities of ourself and all those notions of like what's right. This is what we put in the light. And so clearly what I've done is I've told myself what is right is when you're on public transportation, you don't make a lot of noise to disturb other people, especially not of this type, where you, hey, put your headphones in, or hey, wait to have the call when you get off, right? Something in me has got this notion that, hey, being quiet and considerate and respectful, right? You get a star there for that. Hey, good job. And spreading your noise everywhere, right? That's a bad thing. You don't do that. That's wrong, right? And because I've shoved this behavior, right, or this concept or this way of doing things into the darkness, I deny that desire impulse exists within myself. In other words, to have this conception of who I am, which is, hey, I'm someone who doesn't do that, right? I'm a better person, right? I'm superior, right? All these stories. I have to put in the light, my conception of myself being considerate, and I have to shove in the darkness any temptations or desires I have to be the other way, which is maybe living a little more out loud, living a little more freely, not being so caught up in how other people are going to react to things, right? I shove that into the darkness, and the way I do it in my physical body is I essentially coil around it. I kind of shove it somewhere. I do it a lot in my ribs. And again, I don't do this consciously. I'm not like I'm consciously shoving things down there, but at some point in my development, it was almost kind of like I trimmed that part of myself off, right? That desire or ability off, and I repressed it. I shoved it down, and I kind of trapped it in this coil. I trapped it in my body. And I just say no, right? Listen, not allowed, bad, go to timeout, right? All that stuff. And so that thing is then coiled, but it's not gone. It's not lost. It's not dead. It's not shipped out of the country, right? It's existing within me constantly because it's a part of me. It's a part of who I am. And because I've trapped it in this little space, it's essentially like a prisoner. And when this person who's exhibiting this quality, right, and he's got it free, right? So it's able to flow freely throughout his being, this ability to be more free-spirited, less caught up in others' reactivity. And so it's free to go anywhere, including wherever in the brain or in the heart choices are being made. And so that's how, with that freedom, this person is able, through their phone and their speakers, right, to share their energy. Well, that resonates with that same desire in me. But because mine is trapped, because mine is coiled, because mine's existing in kind of this prison of my body, when it resonates, it's almost kind of like a prisoner rattling the bars with a tin cup, right? I experience it in my body as almost kind of like a rebellion, or almost kind of like an attack. And what's crazy about it is the truth of this dynamic is not obvious, right? Or at least it hasn't been obvious to me. And I'll say, even though I believe this to be true, and even though I consistently try to remind myself of this, it's a lot easier said than done. It's a lot easier known than practiced. And I think part of the reason of that is we always have confusion and evil in us that's operating to kind of keep us from recognizing the truth of cause and effect. Right, and I often represent that with the disco ball, right? Constantly mirrors, constantly redirecting us towards something else and away from the truth. When I'm feeling aggravated and I'm asking, well, why is this happening and how can I fix it? When I try to look and see what's going on, what happens is I look, I see the disco ball, and that directs me outward to this other person, right? It says it's their fault. They're doing it. They're causing it. Can't you see? Can't you hear the sound they're making? Can't you see how that sound is making you feel? Can't you see how that sound is making you think and respond? It's their problem, right? They're the ones who are wrong. So direct your frustration, your anger, your problem-solving attitude toward them. But of course, because I'm sitting in my seat on the bus, and I either don't have the courage, or honestly, maybe on a deep level, I realize it's not their fault, so I don't do anything about it, I just simmer with it. I just get caught in these loops in my mind of anger, frustration, resentment, judging myself for not doing something about it, judging myself for thinking about doing something about it, right? All that stuff. And I think that's because in this confusion, I'm externalizing the situation, right? I'm not recognizing that it's something homegrown in me. But, with practice, with recognition, with listening to the teachings of others, I've learned this can't be true, right? If it's an aggravation that's in me, yes, another person can be alerting me to a trapped energy inside of me, but it's never they who are causing the pain. What's causing the pain is this coil, right? If there was no coil here, right, this energy would be free to move through the body just the way this person's is. And again, there's confusion here. The disco ball says, no, you can't have that, because then you're going to do this and you won't accept yourself and you won't like yourself, right? That's bad, that's wrong, that's unacceptable. When really what we know the truth to be is, if this energy is free to flow in my body, it can come up to my choice point, and then I can either choose to do it or choose not to. And maybe I still will think, hey, I'd rather not disturb people. I see the person next to me is maybe they had a rough day, they're reading their newspaper, so I elect not to. But I don't make it about right and wrong, good or bad. I just make it about a decision I want to make in the moment. And maybe the next time I'm there, I'm on a quieter bus, there's only 2 people around, maybe they both have their headphones on, maybe I try it out, maybe I have some fun with this, see how it works for me, right? That's living more out of an authentic, empowered choice, instead of basically maintaining a system of repression that's built around this notion of right and wrong. And so the first truth I accept is, it's not an external thing that's causing the pain, it's this internal coiling that's around a trapped energy that's creating the tension and the vibration in the body, the experience inside my body of this deep unsettling and aggravation. So let's say I get past that first disco ball and I'm not externalizing it. The next tricky part, right, because confusion is extremely adaptive, it's very fast. It's not like you defeat it and it gets discouraged and hangs its head and go home. Quite the contrary. It's already waiting at the next stage. The next bit of confusion is, okay, I realize, wow, it's actually in me, but I see this as an enemy. I see this as an enemy within me, a threat within me, a problem within me, right? And the reason that that's tempting, the reason it's easy for the disco ball to kind of spin its mirror around and have me start believing that, is because in that moment, there is pain coming from that area, right? Literally, I feel it in my ribs, maybe I even feel that trapped energy there, and then I feel all of this pain and aggravation pouring off of it. And then what this says is, yeah, this is a bad thing. There's a reason we shove that in there. There's a reason we've sentenced this thing to life in the darkness, because it's bad, because it's evil, because it's wrong. And look what it's doing right now. Look at the pain it's causing you right now. And notice something about this framing, right? It is causing you pain. Notice how this creates a separation, kind of like a person 1 and a person 2, right? So it tried to do it, the confusion tried to externalize it onto this other person to begin with, When that failed and I'm realizing it's inside of me, it's saying, yeah, it's in you, but it's a separate thing in you. As opposed to saying, hey, that is actually you. You are no more you than any other part of you just because you buy into this construct of what's good and what's bad, what's acceptable or unacceptable. This is you as much as any other part of you. And so you are causing this in yourself, which then really breaks down the notion of there being a villain, right, and a victim, right? It really recognizes or points to us instead that really what's there is there's just a disharmony, right, or a miscommunication, a misunderstanding somewhere in a relationship. And the way to resolve it isn't to villainize something or demonize something or, resentence it to prison in the darkness. It's instead to see if maybe what I can do is take a different approach toward that part of myself. In other words, I can try to engage I in a more loving way, in a different way than I have before. So that's disco ball number 2, right? Disco ball number 1 was externalize it to the other person. Disco ball 2 was, okay, blame it on this energy that's trapped inside yourself. See the enemy as something else. See this energy as something else, as an enemy, and attack it, right? Which only then reinforces the coiling pattern, which only increases this situation and makes things worse. The third disco ball is, I think, maybe the subtlest and the hardest one, which is you go, okay, I'm not externalizing it anymore, and I'm not even objectifying my energy where I'm seeing it as something else, right? Some kind of threat that I need to deal with. I'm recognizing that it's actually my own attitude toward it, my own coiling around it, my own sentencing and denigrating of it, that's actually creating the inharmonious connection here. And that if I could change that, right, if that changes, then things will be better for me, right? My energy will flow more freely. I won't be as reactive. I won't have these tight pockets that get aggravated when they resonate with that same energy in someone else. So what this third disco ball says is, okay, great. Hey, you figured it out. Good for you. You realize that the change has to occur within. So let's go about the change, and you know what you're going to do? You're going to be the hero. You're going to be the rescuer. You're going to fix this situation. And the way you're going to fix it is you're going to go in there and you're going to be impressive. You're going to be good. You're going to go in there and you're going to be like a nurse or a nurturer. And you're going to talk to this energy. And and with your charm and with your compassion and with your kindness and all these things, you're going to set it free. Or maybe you're going to be more like a dragon slayer, right? You're going to treat this coiling around it as this dragon that's there, right, kind of coiled like a dragon around its treasure, and you're going to go in and you're going to slay this dragon. You're going to slay it with virtue, with good ideas, with kindnesses, with things like that. Now, I think this is obviously an approach that maybe has kind of a specious appeal. I know for me, I routinely take this approach toward things. But again, the reason I'm characterizing it as another species of confusion is it's still playing into the ego, right? And it's still playing into this notion that there's a problem and that the problem is that, and that I don't need to change, right? I just need to bring this kind of heroic, shiny version of myself into the situation, and that's going to either kind of intimidate this thing or charm this thing into liking me, into working with me, or it's going to drive some evil thing away that's holding it back. We're still, you can see, getting into the drama dance, which I tend to indicate with a triangle. You have suffering in the middle. You have the hero here, the villain here, the victim here, right? The hero battles the suffering. The villain spreads the suffering around. The victim endures the suffering. And essentially, in this dance of drama, we will just rotate through these positions all the time, never actually attending to the suffering itself, but just really focusing on what game we want to play when the suffering arises. And I think the key is not to make it a game, not to make it a project, not to make it a task, not to make it some opportunity for some version or aspect of ourselves that we feel like has been lying in our hidden potential that we're going to now bring out as the white knight to fix everything. What I think we want to do instead is really simplify things and really go into the core of what virtue really is. So we've got our trapped energy. We've got that coil around it. We've seen Disco Ball 1 trying to push us out toward the other person. We've seen Disco Ball 2 trying to get us to see this as an enemy. We've seen Disco Ball 3 trying to get our ego involved, to get us to come in as the hero, right? The charmer, to try to fix the situation. Instead, what we want to do is recognize the situation and be calm and relax. Right? What situation are we recognizing? Really the whole dynamic, right? Recognizing, okay, hey, this person was doing something, right? They must have had a desire or an impulse or an energy within them. That then reached my ears, my field of awareness, activated an energy in me. The reason that energy's activation was problematic or difficult for me isn't because that energy is bad, it's because that energy is trapped. And that trap is a coil in my body, and it's not one that I'm consciously maintaining, right? That's why the ego game doesn't really work, because that's the conscious mind trying to go in and fix it, but the conscious mind isn't what's perpetuating this. This is an old subconscious pattern, something in our past where we got this idea that this belongs in the darkness, this belongs trapped. It cannot express in our behavior, it cannot express in our personality. We don't think of ourselves that way. And so because it's deep subconscious patterning, right, we know that the conscious mind isn't going to in any way being able to unravel or fix it. Instead, we recognize the situation for what it is, and what we do is we try to create a vibe that's conducive to uncoiling, right? A vibe that's conducive to tightness, softening, right? And the vibe for that, right, I said it before, I mean, and there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I made a video the other day called the 6-step technique for self-healing. I think that's one that we could use here. But sometimes even techniques like that feel overbearing, feel too difficult, or maybe get the ego a little too involved. And so just breathing and relaxing, right? Breathing and relaxing, right? And we hear that, and maybe your mind does what my mind does, which goes, okay, that sounds great, but is that gonna fix the problem? Or how long is that gonna take? You know, I don't wanna feel this way anymore. I don't want this dynamic to be happening anymore. I want this dynamic to end now. So can't we have a solution that's going to fix it now? And can you see how even those words I'm choosing, that language I'm choosing, I'm falling back into the disco ball patterns from before, right? Problematizing it, objectifying it. I keep calling it, right? As though it's not me, as though it's not as much me as the energies that I'm speaking with publicly right now. And so what we have to do is to get out of the mental looping, right, that's happening in our head brain, in our gut brain, even in our heart brain, that is matching and reinforcing this. And the way we do it is we breathe and we relax, and really what we're doing there is we're surrendering the whole situation to essentially to a higher power and to the flow of time, which are really two statements of the same thing, to basically ask and invite this uncoiling to happen in its own time and in its own way. We don't see ourselves as our job to uncoil this. We just see it as an opportunity to kind of further or promote the uncoiling. But the way we do it is in a way that's uninsistent. We don't force an agenda. We don't force a timeline, because again, that's buying back into the wrong paradigm, which is going to change our attitude, change our vibe, and just reinforce the coiling and the tightening. We breathe. We relax, right? We feel this energy, feel the tightness around it, right? Relax, but we don't want to fixate, right? We don't want to get stuck. We don't want to coil our attention around it, right? Which just recreates the coiling dynamic. We want free space. We want free opening. Why do we want that? Because we want to promote freedom, healing, mercy, forgiveness, and redemption within ourselves. And we want to do it in a way where we're not sitting there like we're the facilitator of a group counseling session where we then get the credit if it goes right? I think that's what the ego is trying to do when it kind of intervenes and plays an active role. What we want to do is we want to allow this coiling to uncoil in its way in its time. Because what is this coiling, right? This was something from deep in our past, right? It could have been in a childhood, it could have been a formative moment in our young life. It could have been something that happened in the last year, some trauma that happened to us, some event that happened to us that struck us on a deep level, and we kind of responded to it fearfully, right? And we felt like, oh my God, I never want that to happen again. I'm gonna learn my lesson. I'm gonna prevent that situation, that feeling from ever happening again. And the way we do that, right, is again on this subconscious level, we basically wall off whatever we designated as wrong, kind of like burying it in scar tissue, right, covering it over with a scab. And this is us too, right? This is our body, this is our energy. It too, right, is coiled and trapped, it's tight, so it's not healthy either. It's not in the flow of our being, right? So not only is this energy within it, right, this say impulse or desire or this attitude or approach toward things, not only is it trapped, but what is trapping it is also essentially trapped. So the warden in a way is also the prison too. And so what we're doing is we're trying to give this thing the freedom to soften and to uncoil in its time. We're trying to kind of send the message to it with our behavior, right? Not with our statements and our charm and our arguments and our kind of passive aggressive, do you get it yet? Have you understood yet? We are literally trying to create the vibration from our heart, right? Of patience, of compassion, of understanding, right? Because that's kind of the antidote to what was going on before, right? When we experienced the trauma, we did the opposite of all those things, right? Intolerance, impatience, insistence, right? Get that away from me. Don't make me feel that, right? Tight, stiff, insistent, coil, coil, coil. The antidote is the undoing of that by doing essentially the opposite, right? The positive energies of those, breathing, relaxing, feeling the energy again, feeling the coil again, and breathing and relaxing, right? Being at peace with it being there. And so if over time we make that our chosen reaction to the situation, right? When that happens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cultivate peace. Not in an insistent way, not in a browbeating way. I'm just going to see that as an opportunity to practice peace. Then what we'll see is this coil will gradually soften, gradually relax, and that energy is now reliberated to flow throughout our system, almost kind of like the blood flowing through our bodies, right? We had a clot before, and now it's free to circulate all throughout our energy, all throughout our being. And the disco ball is there to say, no, that's bad, right? This thing was a prisoner. It's going to be angry toward you. It's going to be resentful toward you. It's going to be bitter toward you. And that's just simply not true. When it's liberated, when it's free, it flows again. It swims like a fish that's gotten out of its little tank and into the ocean. There's no bitterness, there's no hard feelings. The hard feelings is based on the coiling, right? Once it's free, you're free. Then this energy, right, which was coiled up, is now free to also move around the body, right? To be presented as a potential behavior, presented as a choice, right? And we trust ourselves to respond the way we want to and to experiment, right? And not to be so scared of acting this way if we want to act this way. So that in a nutshell is kind of the, say, the behavior modification piece of this, the practical approach piece, which is recognizing the situation, seeing those three disco balls of externalization to the other, objectification of the energy, or then trying to use a dramatic approach to try to fix it quickly. Instead, what we're trying to do is to cultivate a calm vibe of relaxation, of peace and surrender to allow the situation to resolve on its own, knowing that when we're pumping that vibe out, right, we're kind of, it's like playing calm, relaxing music for this. And it gives this the freedom, right, and the comfort to know that it's safe now, right? This is safe now. It's kind of like an inner child, right? It's safe to come out. It's safe to relax. And we're not going to force you to come out. We're not going to yank you out. We're not going to extract you. We're not going to stab you. We're not going to shoot you with an anesthetic to calm you down, right? Give you a Valium or something like that. We're going to let you uncoil in your time, right? Undo the pattern that was done before. And in so doing, not only will we uncoil that energy and free that, but we'll also be doing our bodies and our minds the favor, because is this ever really a bad idea? Okay, so I've done that. Let me now try to show what I think is happening on a divine level, what is creating this dynamic. Okay, so we've got person 1, got person 2. And in my personal metacosmology, I represent the perspective of the individual being with like a lowercase I, right? An I that sees a you, right? An I that sees a me. Now behind them, my belief is that there's spirit. And spirit exists beyond the physical realm. It exists really beyond time and space. It's really kind of more the core and the essence of what we as individuals are. And, it's tempting sometimes to think of the spirit as just being something that's kind of removed in the sky, aloof, kind of living its spirit life while we're down here living our physical life. And admittedly, life can seem that way sometimes, but what I believe is that's really not true. It's actually quite the contrary. Our physical life is always nothing other than a full expression of the spirit in that moment. Our body, right, and our environment, the other people we encounter in our lives are all expressions of our individual spirit. It's essentially like the spirit painting an interactive portrait of ourselves. And what we're doing from this perspective in I is essentially being fully immersed in that portrait of the spirit and essentially experiencing the spirit on the level of physical sensation, right? Feeling the spirit in our body or encountering spirit through our physical senses. So again, it kind of takes that notion on its head. It's not like the earth is a frozen fireball in the vacuum of space. All that's down here is meat and muscle and bone, and God bless you, you wonderful little spirit. You're just like some stars twinkling in the sky far away from me. And maybe when I die, I'll return to you, but until then, we don't really have a relationship. You wouldn't even relate to my world, and I wouldn't relate to yours. I think the spirit hears that and laughs and is like, bro, this rock, this frozen fireball you're on, all this physical stuff you're doing is me in physical form, is basically a metaphor, an interactive metaphor for me. And what you, who is really me, are doing when you're in this physical form and identifying with the physical form is you're exploring yourself, right, in the entirety of yourself on an intimate level, the way you cannot at the remove of spirit, right? Because again, I said spirit is in the ethereal realm, it's outside of time, it's outside of space. I think on the spirit level, the way things are understood is much more geometric, much more spatial. I think the spirit would use a lot of kind of charting, kind of like maybe the stars, like something like that. So it's not that the spirit doesn't have access to information, but it isn't feeling things on a visceral level the way we are here. And so the spirit incarnates so that it can have that experience with itself that isn't so abstracted and maybe cerebral and is really much more visceral and intimate. Now, what's kind of wild about this is it's not like person 1's spirit is just creating person 1 and person's 2 spirit is just creating person 2, right? Like two different video game controllers or something like that. And these are independent entities operating in a physical environment. The reality, as I see it, is much closer to this. These spirits, while they are distinct, if two physical beings are in each other's presence or sharing an environment, that is actually an indicator that these spirits are in a collaborative, co-creative situation. In other words, no individual being comes into your presence unless your spirit and the other person's spirit, not merely consent, choose to co-create a moment that's here. And my sense of things is, it's not like my spirit is creating all this stuff for me and your spirit's just creating all this stuff for you. The creation is utterly blended. It's utterly coalesced. So that what's coming out is a single creation, right, experienced by both beings at the same time. And it's not attributable to one spirit more than the other. Again, it's an outgrowth of the two spirits together. And if you expand this out where you have 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, it's all of their spirits, essentially the co-presence of the physical beings in a shared environment is an indicator of spirits co-creating. which I think is kind of a cool idea. Instead of like, oh, I just bumped into this person again, it's no, our spirits are actually locked in this beautiful dance of co-creation, and the only reason I'm able to experience you and you're able to experience me, right, it's actually just an indicator that our spirits are doing this dance together. So then that kind of raises the question, okay, well, why would the spirits do this, right? Or what would be kind of the purpose or the point behind this collaborative co-creation? And essentially, in a nutshell, my sense of things is this. Each spirit has within it kind of this coiled, twisted pattern. I call it the pattern of elseness. In other videos, I've kind of gone through the whole origin story of how I see that actually tracing back to the very birth of the universe. I won't go into that here. What I'll say here is that each spirit has its little coil of elseness, and you could think of this kind of like maybe like a neon sign, like a beer sign or something like that. Right? Each little one has its, maybe his says food. It's not a very good neon sign, but we'll go with it. Beer, food. And along the way, there are these little like crimps, right? Little pinch points or blockages, which are preventing the smooth flow of the light through it. And so maybe this part is a little dimmer, right? This part's a little too bright. Maybe by the time you get here, it's dark entirely because the flow of the energy has been pinched. You've got the same pattern over here, right? So there's some, we won't call them flaws, but we'll call them hindrances, right, or obstructions in this kind of coil of the spirit, this filament of the spirit. And the spirit senses this, and part of the reason the spirit's incarnating is the spirit will then recreate that beer sign, right, or this food sign here, in the individual being, and through the traumas that it creates in the person's life, right? And again, this concept is so radical, to my mind at least, that I'm just going to say it again to own it and to acknowledge it. The trauma is not something that happened to me. I was not a victim of the traumas in my life. My spirit created the traumas in my life to recreate the pattern, right, that the spirit has in my physical body. And the traumas, right, so this you could say is kind of the shape of my spirit, the unique kind of snowflake manifestation of my spirit. Each person has their own little neon sign with its own word on it. And the traumas then go in and recreate the very same pinching patterns and crimping patterns and blockages patterns that exist on the spirit level get reflected with complete fidelity in the body, right? And so a childhood trauma, a teenage trauma, a trauma from going to war, a trauma that happened last week, it's essentially like the stitching of this pattern again in the body. And again, the reason the spirit's doing it is while the spirit can maybe see on a spatial level what's happening here, to really fully understand it, to fully engage this inheritance or this legacy it has, it actually incarnates so that it can feel it viscerally, so that it can know it literally from the inside out, the way we do with the patterns of pain that are in our body. Okay, so I've got my, if I'm person one, right, and you're person two, I've got my beer sign with its telltale kind of pinch points and crimps. You've got your food sign, right, and you, over the course of your life with your traumas, right, have essentially restitched those in for you. And one of the reasons, I can slip into sometimes oversimplifying things or kind of trying to fit everything into my theory. I don't in any way want to suggest that the only reason we would come together would be to resolve these crimpings. But I think this is one of the significant things, one of the gifts that our spirits give to each other and that we as incarnated beings give to each other, is the ability to recognize where our crimpings are. And if we map this back onto the map I have before, those crimps, I think, are nothing other than those repressed energies, right? Those things that we have shoved into the dark side of who we are, into our shadow, into our denial. And that then is the crimp, right? And just as the coil around it from our energy is what prevented its flow, that crimp in there is what's preventing the energy that's coming into this beer sign, right, and going out here. It's getting stuck at all these points, right? Same dynamic. And a reason that our spirits are co-creating this situation, right, where we're on that bus, right? And the music's playing, and I'm losing my dang mind, and this is going bonkers. And I got disco ball 1 and disco ball 2 and disco ball 3. It's basically giving me an opportunity to heal this. And when it heals here, it heals here. And as these heal, as this beer sign goes from being a splotchy, sparky, partially shaded, maybe it looks like BER or BEE or EEE because the light isn't flowing through it right? So the image isn't as crisp and clear and luminous as it could be. We incarnate because it's at the physical level, at the level of feeling, that we finally have the intimacy with this blockage and the ability to then practice relaxation, practice breathing, practice surrender, practice peacefulness, practice compassionate patience that allow the uncoiling to occur, right? That allow the free flow of this to occur, right? This is now free to disperse itself in the system to go wherever it sees fit. It's no longer trapped in whatever pattern I designated to it out of my fear. It's liberated, right? And as each of these gets liberated, and now when the spirit recreates the body, either in this life, right, or in a different lifetime, that body doesn't have the same blockage patterns anymore. And, as physical beings in a life that want to try to give gifts to ourselves, be kind to ourselves, be good to ourselves, try to have tomorrow be better than today. Try to have next year be better than this year. Trying to heal, trying to not feel lost or agitated or reactive, frustrated, hostile, sensing that there's a better way, seeing that we ourselves have been better when our hearts have been open, we've been relaxed, seeing other people who don't react like this, knowing that that's possible, but wondering, well, how do I do it? I can't seem to break this pattern. I can't seem to break this spell. I just keep, every time this happens, right? I think if we use the approach that I described before, and again, that's just one of many, many ways that you can approach it. There's a lot of wisdom teachers out there who have different ways to do it. Some of them talk about really using an inner child framing. There's a whole bunch of different ways out there. But if we can see that as one of our major goals and opportunities in life, really, let's actually change that from goal to opportunity, is we actually recognize this aggravation and this pain. A light bulb goes off and we go, aha, this is a good thing. Why? This is an opportunity to do some real work that can really benefit me, not just now, but long into my future. And not just in this life, but deep into the future of my spirit. Because what I'm doing is not merely just getting over some hang-up I have. I'm actually going into the fabric of who and what I am, emanating from my spirit self, and resolving and uncoiling these tensions, which have been embedded in the very structure of who I am. And this may seem like a burden, this may seem like a cross to bear, and I won't go into the deep dive here because it takes too long and this video is already getting up there, but just know that this is actually a gift in and of itself. It's essentially our inheritance from the birth of the universe. It's what allows us to go out into experience and then also guides our way back home to heaven, to oneness. Because as we do this uncoiling work, what we're doing is we're essentially kind of emulating and channeling that heaven energy, that peace energy, that accepting energy, that compassionate energy in the moment. As we make that a habit and something we practice again and again, we see more and more of our coils uncoiling, right? Which means more and more of our neon sign is becoming uncrimped and uncramped. And now the energy of the universe is able to flow through us without those patterns of resistance, without all those hang-ups, without all that reactivity. Instead, what we're able to be is, instead of a being that's constantly either afraid of or dealing with its reactivity, reacting to its reactivity, getting upset with others, isolating itself from others who tend to cause its reactivity, right? Oh, I don't hang out with those types of people, right? Instead, we're really more of an open heart, and we're there and we're available to be ourselves. And so when this person's playing their music, we can sing along, we can dance along, right? And maybe we can remember what it was like to be so reactive. And then when someone else, right, person 3, sees us and we're doing something that upsets them, and they're in disco ball number 1, and so they're blaming it on us. They're getting mad at us. What can we do? We can do our same practice. We can zoom out. We can see the situation for what it is. We can say, aha, I remember when it was like that for me. This poor person's looking in a mirror and they're seeing my face in the mirror and they're blaming me. So we don't have to burden our heart with sad stories that I'm a bad person, I piss this person off, or we don't have to go to our own disco ball, right, and say this is a bad person and avoid them. We see the situation. We see it for what it is. We know the real reason that spirits put physical beings in our proximity, right? It's not one reason, but one reason is to help us recognize where our pinch points are and our blockages are. And the way it does it is it lets one person who has that energy that's free show it to the person who has that energy that's trapped. And when the person who has that energy is trapped is able to see past the disco balls and confusion, accept the fact that it's trapped within them, and then use a wise approach to liberate it, that's where we can begin to see more and more peace and harmony spreading, not just in the individuals, but between us. We can see more and more of these coils, and crimps and pinches, no longer manifesting in the spirit level or on the physical level. And this, I think, is how an individual can grow and mature and evolve. This is how a community and a society, I think, can grow and mature and evolve, and how ultimately a species can grow and mature and evolve. But notice, I'm not talking about global crusades or things like that, and I'm not talking about these drastic overhauls in our lives, change your diet completely, do all that. Those things that I've just talked about have their time, they have their place, they have their function. But if what we're talking about is healing the patterns within us that don't seem to resolve themselves in time, that just seem to recur over and over again, this approach of really being a beacon of peace within yourself and allowing things to happen in time, allowing the healing to occur, and we recognize ourselves really as kind of this little vibration in the middle of it all. And our commitment is, I'm going to vibrate peace. I'm going to vibrate compassion. I'm going to vibrate patience. That begins within us, heals within us, and then as we're more of a healed agent, we don't then compound this person's confusion. That may free them up to do a little more work on their neon sign. Remember, their neon says chips, right? And maybe it would have been a year before they were able to engage that little crimp that's in the C on their chips. But because this person had an open heart, didn't react to this person's reactivity, maybe this person felt a little more safe and a little more spacious than they would have otherwise. And so they're now able to maybe see past their disco ball and get a little closer to the peace themselves. This is kind of that chain reaction of virtuousness that I think can really lead to a change in us. And notice, it always, always, always involves beginning peace within. And really, the action this person takes toward this other person isn't some heroic thing, isn't some brave thing, isn't some genius thing. They're not just some old soul who's blessed with the gift of peacefulness. They've gone in and done the work in themselves, and because they've done that work and kind of cleared their field, it now flows naturally through them. And they can't help but feel compassion for this person. They can't feel superior to this person. This person's in the same situation that they were. And if they hadn't gone through that process, they couldn't have been in the situation that they're in. Right? So that's why any sense of superiority or even being more advanced than the other person is nonsense. Really what you end up with is someone saying, wow, I had a gift that was given to me, right? A gift that came in time. And I would like to, at least at a minimum, not prevent that gift from flowering in you. And so instead of playing into reactivity, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to sit here and, give you a lecture in this moment. Kind of ironic because I know I'm kind of lecturing right now. But in this moment, I'm not going to lecture you and say, hey man, you would be a lot better off if you just did this, this, and this. I'm going to let my truth, the truth of how I act, be its own thing. And I'm going to give you the freedom, right, and your spirit, which is co-creating this experience with mine, the freedom to undo its crimping and its knots in its time, right? And notice that that's consistent with the vibe we set from the very beginning, right? We're not going in as the white knight. We're not trying to go in as the hero to fix things. We're not trying to earn credit points for ourselves, right? This is getting back into that light and dark game, the good and bad game. what we're trying to do is to be a beacon of peace within ourselves. And we trust that flow of peace first to help us create less resistance and blockages in our system. And then we trust in ways we may never see or appreciate that that's going to echo out into those we come into contact with, and how those chain reactions go off from there. Who knows and who can imagine? But this is how I think an individual changes, relationships change, and ultimately we as human beings will change.